everybody. Welcome to the Podcast Editor Mastermind show, where we get into the business of podcast editing, not just the tech. I'm your host of the evening, Jennifer Longworth, and above me we have
Carrie Caulfield, Eric of YayaPodcasting.com. Check out my shop at YayaPodcasting.com/shop.
And the bottom corner we have.
I'm Daniel Abendroth of RothMedia.audio, and I don't have merch to push.
No, but you and our special guest above you have you're twinning. Anything but a Yeti. And that special guest is the one, the only Mark Deal of lots of things. Podcast Atlanta, Podcast Guest Academy, Podcast Editor Conference.
Hi.
He likes podcasts.
And I'm also a model for podcast shirts.
I'm model for podcast shirts that you can get at Carrie's link, YayaPodcasting.com/shop, if you like the shirt. So, Mark, welcome to the show.
Jennifer, thank you so much for having me. This is great.
I remember when we met, you said something along the lines of, I'm not a podcast editor, but I love podcast editors.
That's still true. And I run a group of almost 6,000 podcast editors with Steve Stewart. And the hidden secret is like, I'm not really a podcast editor. I do like some macro editing and then send it off to a real editor.
Named Steve Stewart.
His name is Steve Stewart. I feel like we have to, take a shot or a drink anytime Chris Curran or Steve Stewart is mentioned on this show.
Or Tom Kelly.
Yeah.
Sparkly jacket. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd like to say I'm president of his Sparkle Jacket fan club. So.
He has 3. So maybe you can wear one and be an entourage. Be a Tom Kelly double.
Tom Kelly, for watching. We'll be in touch.
Yeah.
Paula Jenkins of Just Busters has one. And at She Podcast, we're all like, do you know Tom Kelly? And she's like, why does everybody keep asking me that? We're like, it's the sparkly jacket. So shout out to you, Paula. Also, sparkly jacket. Okay, so anyway, we're here to talk about business plans and business models and business type stuff. So is there some vacuuming going on? I don't know. Is there some vacuuming going on?
It's probably my setup. Yeah. It is my
Daniel's overclocked podcasting setup.
Okay. Gotcha.
I think we just need to let our audience know that it has been an interesting and fun time in the green room getting ready for this stream.
Look,
Yes.
I missed one episode and suddenly nothing works for me. So,
welcome back, Daniel.
Thank you. It's great to be back. It was
Probably not.
Anyway, so Brian, go ahead and throw your question up. What is the difference between a business plan and a business model? Let's just go ahead and get that determined, because when I went for an SBA loan, they wanted to see my business plan.
As you should, yeah.
Well, I didn't have one.
Well,
So I'm like, I don't know what to give you for this.
Right.
So
First I'll start off by saying I co-founded a company and we wrote about 1,000 business plans over a course of 5 years. And one of the reasons you have a business plan is for an SBA loan. And business plans are valuable. That being said, I'm finding a lot in the online entrepreneur space and certainly in the podcast editing space where people are trying to start their own podcast editing business. They're really trying to figure out where do all the pieces of a business fit in. So instead of writing a big, thick 30-page, 100-page business plan document because you know what you want to do, you're just documenting these are the things I'm going to do, projecting your financials so the bank will give you the SBA loan. I propose a business model map. So it's almost like you're traveling to your favorite conference, say like PodFest or Podcast Movement, or maybe even Podcast Editors Conference. And you have a choice. You could fly, you could drive, you can take the interstates, you can take the back roads, but you need to have a destination. And you want to understand where the things are between where you're at now and where you want to be, whether it's a gas station, the airport, the Uber ride, everything. And so that's the purpose of the business model map that I propose. On one page, you have all the elements of a business plan. You don't have to write many, many pages. It all fits on one piece of paper. And then you can strategically map out where things fit in.
Nice. just a basic overview, and then we'll put the pieces together later, or as they come, they'll just fall into place. Also, like kind of like one of those puzzles I do with the old folks at the old folks home, where you can see the puzzle piece cut out, so you kind of know where it goes. It's not a blind puzzle, but it has the outline and the little pieces and everything. And
it'll definitely stand out if a piece is missing, right?
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of this. I mean, there's a lot of times that people have discussions, especially in this online space. Everyone focuses on marketing and sales. Carrie, I know you're a big fan of branding. So people talk about that, but they forget some of the elements of such as the activities and the resources. So it's those puzzle pieces that are missing when you look at the map. You're like, what's this big hole over there? Oh, don't worry about that. But I've got this great sales marketing engine. Yeah, but what about this over here? So that's why I like the map, and I do love the analogy of a jigsaw puzzle.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that you need, in order to do the branding and the marketing, I think I make the assumption that you've already done the plan. Like you have laid out the foundation, because you need to know why you're going, how you're going to get there, and what what that journey is going to be like before you can even talk about or think about what you're going to communicate to your customers to get them to come do it with you. Right. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, that's Cat and I Joe's problem, right? He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know where he was going or where he was go. So that was Cat and I Joe for you. Wow. I totally messed up that song.
Should we do another take real quick so I can get it right?
No.
He's all right.
That's the song you're trying to go for, right? Where
there you go.
From? Where did you go?
I live in Atlanta, so but thank you for singing it. That we should, if there's some way like in post that song.
No. Oh well. So I guess, why is this important for podcast editors to understand?
Okay, but let me just add in one more thing to that question. What type of podcasters or what type of podcast editors need to think about that plan? Is this something that freelancers and side hustlers also need to think about along with the full-time editors?
I think so, because especially the side hustlers and the freelancers, the people that are starting off, perhaps they have a resource constraint. Maybe they don't have the big budget for Facebook ads. Maybe they don't have 40 hours a week to devote to Instagram or whatever marketing channel. Maybe they have 10 hours a week that they need to get everything done. And having that map, you can plot out everything that you need to do, whether it's marketing, whether it's actually editing podcasts, whether it's servicing the invoice and making sure your bills are get paid. So again, I think the one-page map is relevant to anyone, whether they're a freelancer or an individual starting off in the podcast editing space, or maybe even someone who has a team of editors that do the shows for them, or somebody that wants to branch out into other areas of the podcast production space beyond just editing.
At what point, I mean, I know my answer to this, but I didn't do a business plan until I'd been editing for 2 years and then wanted the SBA loan. Ideally, when should you do it?
The business plan or the business model?
Okay,
I did just get them mixed up, didn't I? Well, I didn't do either one. So,
Right.
I didn't do a business plan. Like, plan is what I mean with the SBA loan.
Honestly,
do you need one of those unless you're getting an SBA loan?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and talk about business plans first, because that's what everyone thinks of is a business plan. And this is coming from somebody I made a living of writing business plans, almost 1,000 of them. I think you need a business plan if you are seeking venture capital funding, because they want to see what their return on investment is. I think you need a business plan if you're going to a bank like an SBA loan, because they want to see what their risk of putting this loan together and servicing this loan for you. Yes.
So when we say SBA, we're talking about the Small Business Administration. They offer loans to small businesses. So I just want to clarify that that's.
Yeah, and I was buying a studio. That's why I was getting a loan.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, now continue, Mark.
Yep. And there's a few other reasons. In fact, I was doing business plans for foreign nationals that wanted to come into the U.S. and start a business. So we were writing business plans specifically for immigration purposes, which was, a pretty niche market there. So that's what you need for a business plan and why you would need a business plan. But I don't think that I do think it's a good process to plan out and map your business, but I don't think going through the 30, 100 pages, all the 5-year financials, which are all fiction, by the way, it never pans out the way that anyone plans it. So why do it? Just map everything out on one piece of paper. And then that way you can look and see where your holes are at, where the opportunities are at, things that you need to strengthen, as well as give you an idea of where you can go. Cat and I Joe.
So how often should you go back so once you've created the document, how often should you go back and take a look at it and tweak and revise?
I would think that it's really up to the individual. I would not say revise it every week. It probably doesn't hurt to have some type of regular review process, whatever fits an individual. I know a lot of businesses do an annual review process where they look to see how different business units and activities that they're doing, as well as their growth playbook of what they're projecting in the future. That would be a good time to take a look at your business model map there and say, oh, am I doing all these things? Oh, I've really excelled in this region. This piece over here really needs to be strengthened up. What can I do there? Oh, there's potential partnership opportunities that I didn't think about a year ago that now I'm set up for. So it really depends on the person. Perhaps annual is a good process. I would steer clear of doing it every week because you can't be strategically thinking every single day. You got to be tactical. You got to actually get the work done. So plan the time to be strategic, maybe at an annual process or when you're starting out. So put something together when you're starting out and then a year later come and revisit it. So it really depends.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering, as far as getting started, is this one more thing that'll help you get started or something that's going to hinder you from, getting started? You're going to overthink it. Oh my gosh, if I don't get this done, I'm not going to get started. But then again,
I think it's definitely something that you should do before you get started or early on. And it doesn't take very long to do. In fact, the business model talk that I did at Podcast Editors Conference, I think I covered every element in less than 20 minutes. And the course that we put together for the Podcast Editor Academy members, I think all the video elements together is just over an hour. Now, granted, we broke that up into 11 modules, but again, each one is like 5 minutes, 7 minutes. It's very brief. And the fact you have to put everything together on one piece of paper, you have to be concise. So my advice starting out on the first block is like, just jot something down and don't worry about it. We'll come back to it as we fill everything else out. So I think it's a pretty quick process, and it forces you to think about certain elements that most other people and processes and things online don't really talk about, such as your cost structure and activity resources and how you're actually going to serve your customers. A lot of it is just marketing funnels, and I think that kind of misses the broad picture of actually running a sustainable business.
Kind of in that vein, I mean, I think my wife and I, because we never actually had a business model, we just kind of been winging it. But this past year, we attempted to come up with a plan for the year, and essentially we just kind of mapped out all the different avenues that we wanted to tackle. So I'm working on a Reaper course. We're talking about starting a podcast, just different things that we could kind of focus the business. Unfortunately, COVID happened, so everything kind of went out the window. But is that kind of similar to what you're talking about, or how does that fit in?
So all the different courses and things, that would be one of the 9 blocks, and that would be your revenue sources or revenue streams. So you could put, say, a Reaper course in there. And how does that tie into what you do? Well, you're an expert in Reaper. You're offering Reaper production services for your clients. But for people that want to do it themselves and fulfill their own podcast production, but they really like your talent in Reaper, that's a segment that you could help people out in that you weren't able to do before in just having a production. So offering courses would fit into the revenue sources and revenue streams, but your customer segments would be the same. The people that you're actually delivering content, or the people that you are actually producing shows for. Your marketing may be the same because you may be bringing people in the same marketing route, either, and it just turns out that they have the budget for you, so you produce it, or maybe not, but they want to do it themselves. Well, then they fall into the course. So a lot of those other blocks wouldn't change, or maybe they have slight deviations, or really leverage all the other work that you're doing and then adding another piece like that. So yeah, I think the process of doing something, adding something like a course, you could see where it fits in there. I've talked to other people that want to add something, but it really didn't seem to, although it was a revenue source, but it really didn't plug into all the other blocks that they were actively working on. And I was already predicting that it was going to fail because it's just so much newness that they really haven't looked at.
So what are the elements and what do you start with?
I personally start with the first one, the value proposition. What your customers get out of what you do. So this is really the value that you provide. Are you reducing, in the case of podcast editors, are you reducing the time for podcasters to produce their show? Maybe you're reducing the stress. Maybe you're offering a higher quality product that they would be able to do themselves. Sorry if I'm not talking as clearly. It's kind of late for me, and I realize that I'm stumbling over my words. Notice I paused there. I apologize. The value proposition, what your clients get out of what you do.
So I'm just going to add to that, because this is something that I think a lot of people trip over, is that value proposition. And I think for me, that's your elevator pitch, right?
It could be a part of your elevator pitch. In fact, what I tell people is value proposition. Go ahead and write your idea and be very brief. Don't spend any more than 5 minutes on value proposition. And yes, value proposition is the crutch, is the core. It's the part of your elevator pitch. But right now, don't spend a lot of time on it. Just jot down, like, I edit podcasts for people. And just put that in your value proposition and then go through all the other 8 elements. And by the time you've done all those, you've really are able to really refine and distill down your value proposition. And I think your value proposition, as well as the next segment that I hope we get a chance to talk about, the customer segments, those two together, I think, form an elevator pitch, because it's what you do and who you do it for, and probably why you do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's how I got my head around that whole concept, because you hear about it a lot, but nobody really says what it means.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, it's like a fancy buzzword, like value proposition, blah, blah, blah. But like actually, defining it as like it's your elevator pitch, like really helps. Because that's actually my wife and I are going to sit down and we're supposed to do it today, but it got pushed back till tomorrow. So I'm glad actually for that. So we can have this conversation, but it's like figure out, I guess, what that value proposition is and who we're serving and like how we serve them.
Mm-hmm. And I find it's a big stumbling block for a lot of people starting out, especially starting a new podcast editing business, because there's a lot of editors. Like, how am I different from all these other editors? And a lot of people feel that way. In fact, the person that's listening to this now may feel that way. Like, well, I'm going to edit podcasts. How am I different than all the people that are talking here? But then you go through the other elements of the business plan, or I'm sorry, the business model. And then you can see how you can really be different in your own value proposition. But it's very hard when you feel like you have to solve everything in value proposition. I tell people, be very quick, very brief. We'll do everything else, and then come back to value proposition, and it's easier to do.
So where do you go after that? You start with value proposition as best you can at the moment.
Yeah, I personally then like to go to the customer segments. This is your market. This is your niche. These are the people that you serve. And what are they like? What specific needs do they have? Mm-hmm. And what channels can they be reached through? Why do you want to serve them, and why would they want to be served by you? So really defining the audience that you are serving, at least starting for. I know a lot of people say, I want to serve everybody. Don't start there. Start with,
such a bad idea.
It is such a bad idea, right? You can grow later and maybe, pivot a little bit, not a lot, but pivot a little bit. But yeah, be very, very niche and very, very focused. Start with the customer segments. And I think a good elevator pitch incorporates the value proposition and your customer segment. So you marry those two together, and then it becomes a really good elevator pitch if you're required to do something like that.
So is this where go ahead, Carrie.
I was going to say, for me, an elevator pitch really is just the act of getting comfortable with telling people what you do and why. Like, really.
True. And it turns out that most people don't want to hear from you, Carrie. I hate to say it, but that's true of everybody. They don't want to hear like, Mark, what's your elevator pitch? And then you statically talk to them.
Well, see, I don't do it. So I go low key, and I do this like when I go to remember in-person conferences.
What?
Oh, yeah, right.
So one of the things, and it really wasn't about the pitch, it was about being comfortable explaining to people what I do, essentially, but I would go to every vendor and I would introduce myself. And if they're a question, because they're trying to sell me something, right? So they want to know about what I do. So I give them my elevator pitch. And by the end of the conference, it's refined and rolls right off my tongue. So
there you go. Yeah. There you go. I personally like the way that Michael Port defines it in his book, Book Yourself Solid. He hates elevator pitches. He calls them the who and do what statements. And I kind of break down how, this elevator pitch or the who do what statement is a combination of your value proposition and your customer segments. For example, I help single mothers sound their best while expressing their frustrations on podcasts. Well, I've talked about two elements of a value proposition as well as my customer segment. And that way it really helps identify people that not just what you do, but who you do it for. And I think that helps. You're like, I know somebody who's a single mother. Maybe Mark, you'd be a great editor for them. Yeah, granted, I'm not, just an example.
I love that. I do. And I think really that what that does, that exercise at like conferences for me, or just talking about it with people, practicing that pitch, it's just me getting comfortable with, and being clear on what I do. It helps me clarify it personally. So then I can communicate it in other ways to potential customers. So. All right. Yeah. I'm done. That's it.
Could an elevator pitch also keep you focused, I guess, in a way? So just like as an example, I started a nonprofit several years ago, and we came up with like our mission statement, which essentially is kind of like an elevator pitch. And the main focus of that, or like that's how like the leader wanted it to be. So essentially, like you have your mission statement. So if you like something comes up, like, is that something we want to pursue? Well, does it fulfill our mission statement? So in your business, like if you've got like all these ideas that you want to like do, like, does it fit your, your elevator pitch, your business model? And that way you're not getting distracted by all these different things and kind of focus on like what works or like what will get you to your goal.
Right. Yeah, I'd agree with that. A mission statement, a mantra, this elevator pitch, the combination of a value proposition and customer segments, the who do what statement. I think all those to be able to simplify it and really distill it down into like 7 words or less. If you're able to do that is really powerful, as long as you still stand out with as few words as possible. And I think that's great. That way, not only you know what you do, but other people know what you do too.
And I think we're, kind of going through this and thinking about this because this is I think this really does hang up the editors doing business. They really get stuck on this part. And so I know there's a lot of other stuff to get to, but like this, these things that are this, value proposition, it is like, I know it needs, you're saying be quick and I am down with that. I'm like, don't put a lot of thought into it, but I think it does really get hung up, but you're going to go through it and then come back to all these other things and you're going to expand on it later. So
right.
that's why I was
And they
saying.
all kind of surround the value proposition. So then when you come back to the value proposition, it's going to be so much easier because you have such a clear idea of what you do and what you don't want to do. And knowing what you don't want to do is as important, perhaps more important than knowing what you want to do.
So then what happens? Then what's next? So we know our value proposition.
So you
We
got
know
your
where
value
we're about, we know
proposition
who we're
and your
working with.
customer segments. There's the channels. This is essentially the sales and marketing. Are you going to do outbound sales or inbound marketing? Are you going to use social media? There's tons of different channels to leverage. But basically, how are you going to reach your customer segments, essentially your market, and then convert them into paying clients? So that's a big step, and there's lots of little strategies and things to do in there. But a lot of people focus on just that one thing, and I'm saying, hey, it's just one box. It connects your value proposition to your market, your customer segments, your ideal clients, and that's just that one block.
So you said something in the Podfest talk that I found really powerful.
Oh, tell me what that was.
That was pick one social media channel. One. Just one.
Yeah.
And I think that is fabulous advice. Pick one, get to know it, work it, make it work for you. And then before you add anything else in, master that one channel. And I think that was the best advice I've heard in a long time in terms of social media.
Thank you. I follow that myself because I'm not on a lot of social media platforms, but the one I'm on, I'm there. So, people can find me on, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Now, granted, I don't spend a lot of time on Twitter nowadays, but I used to be fairly active there it's become a bit of a dumpster fire. But those are the places where I tell people to find, and usually it's Facebook, since I run all these Facebook groups, and I'm not really good at that. I don't consider myself a social media expert because I'm not a social media expert, but some people consider themselves social media experts. Like, great, maybe they are a good resource or a partner to work with if that's something I need.
And I like how, so far, the order of it is very logical, because by the time you decide your marketing channels and picking that one social media, you need to know who your customer is, because you don't want to get focused on one social media platform whenever your target customer is on something completely different.
Exactly. A past guest you had on the show, Chris Hines, when he talked about his customer segments, he likes dealing with sports and entertainment type podcasts. And then he talked about his marketing channels. He's big into social media, and he talked about his use of hashtags and things like that. That's narrowing down more on the strategies on channels to connect his value proposition as customer segments. But that's just one block in channels. It doesn't talk about how you serve people, how you communicate with them, how do you partner up with other people to do more.
So where in these blocks is what you do? Hey, here's this is why I'm doing it and who I'm doing it for and how I'm getting my message out. But how do you address what you actually do? Or do you address what you actually do?
That's back in the original value proposition where we start there and we finish there. That's what your customers get out of what you do. Now, it's not like I edit podcasts. It's I make people sound better on podcasts. I guess as far as you say, what you do, the physical activities, it would go in a block called activities. That's what you spend your time on. This is what you do that creates the value for the clients. This isn't what they're paying for. This is just what you do. So people aren't paying you to edit podcasts. People are paying you to make them sound good on podcasts. You just do that by editing podcasts. That's your activity.
Right.
But the value proposition is they sound great. They don't have to spend a lot of time doing it. Whatever else you want to throw in there.
Okay. That answered the question. You have a little block called activities.
Yep,
And
exactly. And activities can be, for podcast editors, it can be actually editing shows, but it can also be managing your customer relationships, managing marketing channels, refining your value proposition, managing your cost structure and revenue. So there's lots of little things and activities that are more than just opening up your digital audio workstation, throwing in some files, and cutting, pasting, moving stuff around. You can tell I'm a really bad editor.
That's all you do?
Wait, that's what I do.
Oh.
Wait, Daniel.
So where do the customers fall in? Like the customer relationships? Is that?
Yeah, thank you for that lead in. Yes, the customer relationship. So once somebody is actually paying you, I move them into a different block. And this is the customer relationships, and this is how you interact with your customers. Do they email you files? Do you email them a finished product? Do they call you on the phone? Do they send you text messages? Are they sending you social media DMs and PMs? I thought your interview with Brittany Felix on a previous episode was great because she really talked about her customer relationships. And for her, she only takes clients that deal directly in her project management system because that's what her team works in. That's how she works efficiently. So she's really narrowed down how she wants to service her customers and what relationships that she wants to have. People don't call her or email her. They all have to fit inside of her project management system. Now, some people, need that additional hand-holding, and maybe you offer that level of service. And I know there's some editors that will do the same job, the same editing job, but depending on the level of service that you want, you may pay twice as much.
Yeah.
Nice. That's more to consider, like how to do my pricing structure. Because there are clients who I know that on Tuesday I'm going to edit their episode. It's going to be there. I'm just going to upload it. I don't have to do any hand holding. They don't ever ask questions except for, "Hey, are you invoicing me or what?" and that's all I heard from them. Otherwise, it's like smooth sailing. But then there's the other customers. "Oh, by the way, this is this and that is that. And do you have any advice?" Or, so I should, yeah.
And I personally think that's okay because a lot of those clients that are certainly at the A game in their field and their niche, and they know they need that additional hand holding, they may say, "Jennifer, I really need to be able to email you or to call you. How can I pay for that?" And maybe you have a level of service. Well, if you're at this, platinum level or bronze level or KY level, because of KY production, then you pay this level, but then you have access to a booking link, and then you can control that. Well, you have to book me during our regular business hours. I need 30 minutes notice. Maybe I need a day notice. Again, you can control that. And depending on their level of service that they pay for, you can kind of ration off your customer relationship, even though you're doing the same activity otherwise, say it's editing a show. And that's just one way that you could drastically change your own podcast editing business model by just tweaking one box. And that's why I like the idea of putting everything together in a model on just one piece of paper, because then you could see, tweak this, move this over here. I haven't connected these two pieces, but if I do this differently than these other people, then I'm totally different.
I like that. That's a good way to visualize it. So, well, I didn't want to steal it from you, Jennifer. I'm sorry.
No, go for it. No.
I was going to say, so
it's your turn.
Okay. So after customer relationships, what else is there to consider? What else?
Well, we've already and that's all on the, I would say, like the right-hand side of the model. Then you need to talk about your revenue sources, because you've talked about the value proposition and the customer segments and all, basically servicing the people. But then you want to talk about, what are they paying for? And this is where you go into, is it a monthly retainer? Are you paying per episode? Do I want to segment on different services? Do I want to offer courses like a Reaper course? So all the things that you're going to charge money for would go in that revenue sources. And then that's all the external facing part of the business, right? That's what the client's perspective of your business is. That's the value that you create. But there's a whole other side of the business model that talks about your internal perspective and your efficiency.
So anytime. Oh, go ahead, Daniel.
No, I'm just thinking how this web kind of works together, because you have your revenue sources. How does this revenue source tie into your value proposition? Who does it serve? What channels do you market? It just all that. It's kind of visualizing what that connection is on all the boxes. Exactly,
because people aren't paying for what you do; they're paying for what they get. And they are paying for that. If you can maximize that value gap, Meaning, like, let's say you do a job for $200, but it's worth $1,000. That's a value gap of $800. So every time a client can pay you that $200, they're getting a perceived value of $800. So they're gonna want to do that. So that's how you kind of frame your pricing together for your revenue sources, is around value, not so much, well, it takes me this time to do it, and I want to make a certain dollar per hour. And that's okay for some people that want to start off on the cost base. And back when we did the podcast editor survey, we saw that a lot of people were kind of doing that. But once they hit about $50 an hour, it was like a total another inflection, because then people that were getting paid around $50 an hour, they realized value proposition and how they can maximize that value gap. And then rates started going through the roof.
So when you talk about value gap and the perceived value the customer is getting, how do you really measure that? Like, how do you know what that is?
Well, hopefully you really know your clients and you know your customer segment pretty well, and you can somehow quantify whether it's qualitatively in fuzzy, warm buzzwords, or qualitatively, numbers and metrics and things like that. But if somebody makes let's say they're a professional and they want to charge $100 an hour, say they're like a CPA or an attorney or whatever it is that they need to do, but it would take them like 8 hours to do your job because they're not as efficient as you, nor would it be as good. That's a perceived value there of $800. But it could also be what the marketing value of this is. Like, say you're doing a show for them, what's it mean for sponsors or for their own internal customers? Maybe it's the cost of a therapy and a therapist. If you've seen some of the people that have a podcast these days, it's really about their own personal therapy. And therapists are pretty expensive.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So if you want to make somebody's therapy sound better on the microphone as a podcast editor, that could be your value proposition. Like, hey, podcast therapy, start your own show, and I will make you sound less of a crazy wingbat once it goes live.
Huh. Write that down.
Yeah.
Is that a t-shirt?
T-shirt. All right, Brian, write that down.
I'm gonna listen to the playback on that.
Yeah.
I was very jealous of Michael Jerry's show. I was like, he's got a quote that made it to a t-shirt, or at least carried it on his show.
Everybody can have a t-shirt, right?
Yeah.
You can come on the show. I'll make you a t-shirt in your honor. Right?
That's what this is all about. Like, can I share something so good that inspires a t-shirt? So
yes. Talk about podcast therapy. All right. That's it.
All right,
Oh
I'm
my God.
distracted. Oh, that's all you got?
I'll shut up.
Well, that's not all Mark's got. We haven't been, I think you said there were 9 little blocks, right?
yeah,
We
and
haven't gotten all the way around yet.
we have it. And so we'll focus on the internal perspective. This is what you would see inside your business. This is your efficiency. Jennifer, we mentioned it earlier, the activities block. This is what actually takes your time. This is what you physically do. So editing shows, that's an activity block. This is the time that you spend in all the other things, such as doing the marketing, customer relationships. That's all in activities. And so that's the stuff that you do. And there's another block. That's the things that you need in order to do your job. What costs you money? And this could be financial resources. Maybe you need money for hosting or your computers. Maybe it's physical resources. I know you had a podcast studio for a while.
Still do, actually.
So
It's still there.
So, I mean, that is that's a resource that you need to be able to have in order to produce a podcast physically in one spot versus virtually, like a lot of people do. So that's certainly a resource there.
Yeah, I just want to point out that wasn't my cat.
There's always a
It wasn't my cat either. So.
Yep,
She's
there you
very
go.
persistent.
There you go. For those of you listening, it's Daniel's cat showing us respect as a cat does.
And Mark has a
Yep.
kitty. For
Yeah.
those of you
Yeah,
who
I
can't
felt
see.
like in order to be welcome on the show, I needed a bar. This is my daughter's cat, so
Hello.
hello. And
It's
I
a
thought-
stuffed kitty.
Yeah, it's
It
a
is
cute
I
stuffed,
think.
yes. It is stuffed, yes. I'm not just.
We hope.
That would
Not
be-
stuffed like stuff.
This
No.
isn't a true crime podcast.
So resources other than cats, money, time.
Exactly. A virtual research. These are the elements that are critical to what you do. Honestly, the audio files that you need from your client is a resource. So if you don't have a way to pull in that audio, that's something that you need to think about. So there's the activities of what you physically do, and then the resources, the things you need to do those activities. So hopefully that makes sense.
So Brian made a comment a while back in our chat about how many small, tiny sticky notes you need to do this. I mean, as you're talking about all these different pieces, I would want to like be moving them around. And if I was drawing it on a piece of paper, it would just be like crazy. So I don't think we've gotten all the way around your circle yet, but still logistically, how do I start putting this together? Like sticky notes?
You could do sticky notes on a wall. I've seen businesses, they'll have these big workout sessions and have people come in and have this map up and they'll do the sticky notes. But personally, I just like printing out a sheet of paper and have my blocks in there. And I have some of these questions that I ask myself in those blocks. And then I'll start writing down inside the blocks of what it is that, I want to do in this little block thing here. Again, at a fairly high level, because I want it to be something that I can look at on one sheet of paper. That being, it's all the way over there. I can't reach it. But I mean, that being said, I do have like 11 by 17 sheets of paper. Sometimes I make them pretty big. But for me, I just use one sheet of paper. If you want to use Post-its, you can do Post-its.
I've got software I use called MindMaple for Windows. That sounds like it would do the same thing.
I mean, it certainly
But
could.
digitally.
Yeah. You just have this segments connected to each other and just have the branches off that for the mind map. That's certainly one way of doing it. And that's something, and it reminds me, a lot of time people talk about resources such as what's the best audio plugin or what's the next project management software. I would caution people, don't rush out and buy something or subscribe to something just because you've heard somebody say, oh, this is great. This has revolutionized my business. Well, that's their business, not your business. So buy what you need when you need it and unsubscribe from AppSumo emails. Just get the stuff you need. Don't buy it because it has this great sales page. Like, oh, I could totally transform my. I'd never thought about my business or business model, but this sales page sounds like I could do that if I buy this piece of software.
This podcast is sponsored by AppSumo.
Or not.
No,
Not
We
now,
just
sorry.
unsubscribe.
it's more like we sponsor AppSumo in our purchases. That is a really good idea. It's FOMO, right? You don't really need a ton to actually run an editing business. So, yeah.
All right. So we got resources. All right. So we've got a value proposition. We've got our customers. We've got our marketing tools, which you called something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I call it channels. So there's two more.
Channels.
Yeah, there's two more blocks if you just want me to, if that's what you're getting at. All right.
I'm
so,
trying to get review them all in my head and get there.
Understood. I didn't want to jump in and go into a monologue because I realize it's a podcast interview. It's conversational. I have a little bell inside my head whenever I've talked for more than 90 seconds on an interview. I just shut up. So forgive me.
We all stay
if I
here
do
going,
We're waiting for more. What's he going to say next?
that. So the next one is honestly, I believe is one of my superpowers, and that's partners, finding partners, strategic relationships and joint ventures. So the ability to craft your own business model is great, but if you can find weaknesses and then be able to empathetically build somebody else's business model, whether it's an individual, another podcast production agency or editor, or a big company, draft out their model and see where they're strong, where you're weak, and perhaps reach out to them for some type of strategic relationship or joint venture, or perhaps they just need to be a resource for you, or maybe even you be a resource for them, and that would make them a customer or client. So the ability to find strategic relationships and joint ventures through partners is great. And that way you can get more information, some more connections and skills, resources, or connections to other markets. It's pretty commonplace in this online space for people to do these joint venture webinars. Essentially, let me offer my product in front of your audience while we get on a webinar together. That's an example of a partnership where you're leveraging that partner to reach their customer segment that you don't have.
So Brian wants to know, what is the most important partnership in your business?
Well, of course, I would have to say my partnership with Steve Stewart. Since we're here in the Podcast Editors Mastermind.
Is that a contractual obligation that you have to?
Did Steve make you say that? Are you okay?
Blink if you need help.
Yeah, in fact, because Steve's not the first person I've worked with in the past, and so we talked about that. Like, hey, let's put this in writing. Let's have a prenup. And in fact, we're going to have an attorney on in the Podcast Editors Club talking about agreements and contracts and strategic partnerships, and essentially what's the value of a prenup. So yeah, we put something in writing before we started putting all this stuff together. So
very cool.
I like legal agreements, but then again, I work with attorneys all day. So I think I may sound crazy, but I like them, and it's really just.
Would be a good T-shirt.
Well, I like.
I
like attorneys.
I like attorneys.
I like legal agreements.
I like legal agreements. And the ones I craft aren't very long. They're fairly plain English. Like, hey, I do this, you do this. This is what's expected of you. What's expected of me. This is how we'll handle this stuff. And then when things come up that we haven't talked about before, like, hey, let's get together and resolve how to do this. So. Yeah, if you don't have something like that in writing, it's kind of hard to deal with with bumps and bruises and things in the road. So,
all right.
The last segment is cost structure, and that's basically how much does everything cost? Whether it's upfront, like say you need to buy computers or monitor or a cool gaming mouse, and turn your cool gaming mouse into a boring editing mouse, like many of us do. What are your reoccurring fees, whether it's podcast hosting or some of these other digital tools that we use? What are some fixed costs, such as really anything that's fixed or somewhat lower frequency occurring. Variable costs, maybe for every podcast you bring in, you pay other editors to do it, so that's a variable cost there associated with that. If they're not editing, you're not paying them. And then also improvement costs. If you should be able to allocate money to better yourself and better your company. And what better way to do that than something that I would love to pitch?
What would that be, Mark?
Well, gosh darn it. Thank you for asking. That would be the Podcast Editor Academy.
So tell
Carrie
us
is losing her mind over here on the video.
Oh, dear.
Okay, good. Okay.
So, Mark, tell us, what is the Podcast Editor Academy? Some of us were at the Podcast Editor Conference and got the initial
Oh yeah, the awesome deal. Podcast Editor Academy is essentially the resource for people that want to start, build, or grow their podcast editing business or agency. So the business model that I've talked about, we actually have a course that dives into those and a little bit more in various different things, as well as we've segmented a lot of our other courses into those blocks. So when you click on activities, you'll see all of our other lessons that translate to activities, such as Steve Stewart has done almost every digital audio workstation twice over with other various experts, and those replays are inside the Academy. As well as we have live office hours every month and all those sort of things. And thanks for throwing up the URL. You can find out more at podcasteditoracademy.com.
Very good. And I have can I go to a totally unrelated topic? Does anyone mind?
Go for it.
Okay. I want to ask you about Podcast Atlanta.
Oh, okay.
Because podcasting is just me and my microphone. It's podcast therapy, as you mentioned before. Whatever is happening, it's just me and my computer. It's just me. But sometimes I need to get out of my head and go meet with other like-minded individuals. And you did this thing in Atlanta and started with a small group through the Meetup platform. And how big did you grow that?
We're the second largest podcasting meetup in the world. The fastest growing, because the number one is run by Chris Kremistos, and he's been doing it for over 10 years. And I think we're maybe 200-300 members behind him. And we've only been doing it for about 3.5-4 years now. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Podcast Atlanta was really my way of getting together with other podcasters, because my day job was podcasting, and everyone knew the big names in podcasting and the meta podcasters that podcast about podcasting, but that's not me. That being said, like, my day job is podcasting. I wanted to meet and network with other podcasters and hold events, as well as, I'll be honest, I wanted Atlanta to be on the map for podcasting. When people thought of what are the good cities for podcasting, it was always LA or New York. Atlanta wasn't even on the map then. And we had, great podcasting companies like How Stuff Works, which had shows such as, Stuff You Should Know, Stuff You Missed in History Class. So we've got a lot of podcasting companies in Atlanta, but people never thought of Atlanta as a podcasting city. And that was another reason why I started the group, was to really put it on the map. And as well as it allowed me to get the people that I wanted to see on stage that I wasn't seeing a lot of at some of the other conferences, because Atlanta is a diverse community. So I wanted to celebrate the diversity that we have in Atlanta by making the stage as diverse as the audience. And since it's my group, my organization, I can do that. And I see Chris Stone is in the chat. He's in Atlanta. What's up, Chris?
Very good. So how have you guys been dealing with this current no live meetup situation thing? Have you all been doing virtuals? Have you been?
We've been doing virtuals, and I'll be honest with you, our attendance has severely dropped. And you would think that podcasters would be more apt to do virtual events. Well, it turns out, since podcasters work primarily virtually, when I would do like January, I had 100 people show up. February, I had 100 people show up. In fact, Chris Stone, he was there at both January and February, I think. So, and then March, I took off in March because I was running a podcast editors conference with Steve Stewart. Oh, mentioned Steve, so I got to take a drink. That's tea. But then everything was shut down. So now we've gone to virtual, and not as many people are showing up. So our next event we're actually doing with the YouTubers of Atlanta. We're doing a collaborative event, and even still, maybe a few dozen people will show up. So when we did physical events, tons of people would show up out of the woodwork. But now that we're shifting to virtual, because podcasting is virtual, I think that's why our attendance is dropping off a bit. Because
we crave people being around. We're all introverts, but we still need a little bit of extrovertedness to feed that side, even scratch that itch just for a minute. And getting on a Zoom call is not the same at all. Sorry.
Yeah, it's not.
And also, there are a lot of Zoom calls. Can I just tell you how many hours I spend on Zoom each week?
But I feel so cool, because as podcasters and virtual workers and stuff, we were on Zoom like way before this. Mm-hmm. And so now people go, I don't know how to use Zoom. Like, where have you been? I've been using Zoom for a few years.
Exactly. Yeah. My 8-year-old daughter, my 12-year-old son, and my wife, that I will not quote her age, they were not big on Zoom. And now they're all working through Zoom. Like, I've got a pro Zoom account. Let me show you how to use this. And both my son and my daughter have, podcasting microphones now. So they look cool in their Zoom classrooms. I'm like, great, get these microphones out of my studio. No Yetis though. No Yetis.
No Yetis.
Anything but a Yeti.
Anything but a Yeti.
There you go. Oh.
Yeah, and you can get the Anything But a Yeti shirt at yayapodcasting.com/shop. There you go, Carrie.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share? Like where we can, share where we can find you. We know we can find you with the Podcast Editors Club.
Podcast Editors Club on Facebook. That's right. We're very close to 6,000 members. So if
Wow.
somebody's watching
That's
this or
crazy.
listening to this, and first off, thank you for listening to my interview on Podcast Editors Mastermind. As you can tell, I touched on a few stuff of the past episodes. Go back and listen to all the past episodes. They're great. They're wonderful. I was there for the first one. I got to take a picture. It was awesome. But also, oh my gosh, I've lost everybody now. This is really late for me, so I'm trying to stay awake by.
Okay. Go ahead. Continue.
Yeah, Podcast Editors Club on Facebook. We're so close to 6,000. So if you haven't joined, please do. We'd love to have you.
Where
and you
else?
also, yeah,
Okay,
you
go
have
ahead.
some other place on Facebook.
Oh, the internet. Oh, I saw you liked one
The
of the
internet?
posts on the internet. Yeah, I'm on the internet. I run a few Facebook groups around podcasting. So I run another one called Podcast Guest Experts, because before I started Podcast Editor Academy, I started Podcast Guest Academy, my nice little soundboard. So I've got a Facebook group for podcast guests. And I realize I probably shouldn't pull away from the microphone while I'm talking. I apologize, whoever is editing this, and for those watching. Yeah. So I've got a few groups, but as far as editing, Podcast Editors Club is where it's at.
Yeah, agreed.
It's a good one.
It's pretty good. Yeah.
It's pretty, it's no yah-yah,
It's a-
but
It's the best group
It's a
dedicated to
dustbuster.
podcast editing.
All right.
All right.
I am tired too. I'm sorry.
Everyone's tired. So let's go ahead and wrap this one up then. We've been with Mark Deal today. Thank you, Mark, for joining us.
thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Carrie, for having me.
And
Again.
Brian.
And
And
Brian.
Brian in the back. Sorry. Well, we always forget the guy in the back because making everything run and all
Yeah.
the stuff pop up.
He is
like
the
magic.
chat master.
So I'm Jennifer Longworth of bourbonbarrelpodcasting.com. You can find me across social media at KY Podcasting.
I'm Carrie Caulfield Eric of yayapodcasting.com. And you can find me at Carrie Eric on Instagram if you like that kind of thing.
I'm Daniel Abendroth of rothmedia.audio, and you can find me everywhere, I think, at the Roth Media.
And I'm Mark Deal. You can find me on Facebook inside the Podcast Editors Club.
And he looks so cool with his shades. You folks who don't watch live or recorded, you're missing out on all these visuals this evening.
Yeah,
Mhm.
this has been great. And you can find Brian Ensminger at toptieraudio.com and at toptieraudio on Twitter and Instagram.
And Daniel, if someone wants to be on the show, what do they do?
Just go to podcasteditorsmastermind.com and you'll see a link on the top that says be a guest. Click that, fill out the form, and we'll get in touch.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And we'll be back with you in a couple of weeks. Who's our next guest, Daniel?
Tammy Grable Woodford, and she is going to talk about using newsletters as part of your business.
Oh,
Yeah.
I knew
Okay.
that one.
so follow us on Facebook, Podcast Editor Mastermind. Join our group. Follow us, then you'll know
Like the
what's going
page
on.
to do all the things.
Like, subscribe, leave us ratings and reviews, right, Carrie?
No, do not.
You need to put that on a shirt too. All right.
Do not rate and review.
That's
right.
the t-shirt.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.